28 years ago, Tony Guadino had an idea to honor a legend. And that idea put these runners on the trail. On the trail of a man whose story began over 170 years ago.
One misty, moisty morning, when cloudy was the weather, I chanced to meet an old man, clothed all in leather. He began to compliment, and I began to grin. How do you do? And how do you do? And how do you do again?
When I first heard the story about the Leatherman, I thought he was a man of lore, like Rip Van Winkle. But as I was soon to find out, I was wrong.
It was 1858 and no one had ever seen him before. I think he appeared for the first time, or people took note of him for the first time in Harwinton, Connecticut. And, immediately noticed him because he was wearing he was wearing leather from head to toe. And it wasn't just that he was wearing leather, it was that he was wearing leather pieces that had been clearly hand constructed. So they were big pieces of leather that had been sewn together with leather thongs. It was like patchwork, but leather.
Just as interesting is what he did.
He walked a circuit, a route through eastern New York and western central Connecticut, literally between the Hudson River and the Connecticut River. And he did this punctually about every 34, every 35 days. And he lived in caves and other areas along major rocks and so forth. Towns knew he was coming, and you could almost set your clock on the guy.
As word spread from village to village about him, his next appearance was anxiously awaited.
The school kids became really excited when it was Leatherman Day. I don't think they called it that, but that's what I'm saying. And so they were allowed out of school early on days that he was supposed to arrive so that they could be present as he walked through the town.
The Leatherman rarely spoke, and when he did, it was a mumble of English or a few words in French. This created the need for an identity. And in 1884, the Waterbury Daily American created that story.
All I'll say about Jules Bourglais is that clearly it was a slow news day back in the late 1800s, and that story was 100% fabricated for its sensationalism. But it was such a lovely story, it's romance and heartbreak and all of this stuff, that people just ate it up, and it won't go away.
One thing that is certain about the Leatherman is when he passed away and where he was laid to rest.
It is believed that he died in 1889. Apparently he had some sort of lip cancer, cancer of the mouth, and it was very cold. It was in March, and he expired.
It is at this point the story of the Leatherman should end. But it doesn't. Even in his death, he continues to spark the imagination and serve as an inspiration for others. In 1998, after learning of the Leatherman while on a hike north of New York City, Pearl Jam wrote a song that bears his name and tells his story. After over 20 years of research, Dan DeLuca published The Old Leatherman in 2008. He is the unquestioned expert on all things Leatherman.
The Leatherman used to make a pipe for every single one of his shelters. So when he needed it, he had one. At one time, this pipe and all the other pipes would have a stem about yay long.
In 2011, the Leatherman was again on the move and back in the news. Despite the attempts of some to leave him be, the town of Ossining needed to have his gravesite moved.
A lot of people come to congregate and talk about the Leatherman, Boy Scout groups and so forth. And it was becoming a safety concern because the cars were going so fast, so close to where he was located. So what they asked us is if we would remove his remains and place it in another part of the same cemetery at a safer location.
Dig as they did, due to the acidic nature of the soil, the Leatherman's remains were not to be found. But not everyone was disappointed by this news.
Part of me was kind of happy that they didn't find anything. I mean, they dug and they dug and they dug and they sifted and they ate pizza
So the town of Ossining took the soil that would have been inside the coffin, as well as the nails from the original pine box, and buried them inside a new pine casket by his new memorial.
We're very much into our history here, and we're very much into, we have a good group of historians here who want to make sure that people understand how important Ossining is. And the Leatherman was deemed as an important part of that because he traveled here.
New York City filmmaker Ben Fain is currently working on a feature film slated for release later this year in December. But why make this film?
He's always fascinated by the legend of the old Leatherman. And being a filmmaker, he always wanted to make a film on the old Leatherman. And he knew I was a hiker. He asked me if I would be willing to hike his loop. And I said, absolutely.
But before the movie, before the memorial, before the book, and before the song, there was the Leatherman's Loop. Since 1987, runners have been remembering the man that no one truly knew. At this year's race, over 1,200 runners answered the call to compete in a trail run that is as unique and inspiring as the man whose name it bears. This 10K trail run is the largest trail race east of the Mississippi. Over the past 28 years, tens of thousands of people have come to this race and have learned of the legend, all thanks to Tony Gaudino.
Man, I hope hundreds of thousands. I mean, that was, I think, one of the things that I had in the back of my mind when I was involved with starting this race and naming it is, like Dan DeLuca loves to say, keep the legend alive.
So the runners ran, and they climbed, and they fell, and they got wet. And while they did keep time and track who finished in what order, perhaps most importantly, the runners ran with the Leatherman's message in their heart: just keep going.
To me, the man had something to say. He had something on his mind, and we'll never know what that was, but he made his statement through his actions. And he was, I wouldn't say he was loved, but in a sense he was, but he was accepted, and people looked out for him, they took care of him, there was a lot of kindness. There's a lot of lessons.
Living his life as he did, I can't help but wonder what the Leatherman would think and do if he could see today's race.
He'd probably head the other way.